This program is designed to provide general information with regards to the subject matters covered. This information is given with the understanding that neither the hosts, guests, sponsors, or station are engaged in rendering any specific and personal, medical, financial, legal, counseling, professional service, or any advice. You should seek the services of competent professionals before applying or trying any suggested ideas.
Books, PD products, science, fashion, and glam talk. From Bollywood to Hollywood, it's Meet and Greet with Dr. Afshan Hashmi, right here on K4HD Radio and Talk4 TV. And here's your host, international speaker, educator, award-winning entrepreneur, and best-selling author, Dr. Afshan Hashmi.
Hello everyone, this is your loving host and best-selling author and radio personality Dr. Afshan Hashmi, live from her studio in Rockville, Maryland. And today, folks, I will be talking about a movie which I saw on Library of Congress website, and that movie is very good. So, and I will we will see the movie together, and then I will give my thoughts on that. But before I start, these are my two books. The first one is The Modern Mughal Mentality, New Strategies to Succeed in India and the Global Marketplace. And this book is a bestseller, and also this book was hot #1 new release on Amazon. And this one is The Outbreak of a Monstrous Infection. And this is Amazon bestseller, and I want a movie to be made, and also I want a movie to be made of these two books, a documentary for this one and a movie or web series for this one. And also this show is syndicated worldwide to 300 million listeners. So please give me sponsorship, because this brings food to the table, and also these sale of these books bring food to the table. And my husband is very sick, he's on ventilator, so please pray for him that he becomes okay. So now, folks, now I will be talking about that movie. So Rebel, my sound engineer, will play the movie.
From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the African and Middle East Division of the Library of Congress and to our noontime lecture series with today's program entitled Classified as White, Historical Insights into the Racial Classification of Americans of African and Middle East descent. I'm Joan Weeks, head of the Near East section and Turkish specialist. On behalf of all my colleagues, in particular Dr. Mary Jane Deeb, Chief of the Division, I'd like to extend a very warm welcome to everyone. And before we get started, we always like to give you a little overview of the division and the resources in the hopes that you'll come back and use the collections for your research. The division is comprised of 3 sections that build and serve the collections to researchers from around the world. We cover 75 countries and more than 24 languages. The Africa section includes the countries of all sub-Saharan Africa. The Hebraic section is responsible for Judaica and Hebraica worldwide, and the Near East section covers all of the Arab countries, including North Africa, Turkey, Turkic Central Asia, Iran, Afghanistan, and the Muslims of Western China, Russia, the Balkans, and the peoples of the Caucasus, as well as Armenia. After the program, we'd like to invite you to fill in the evaluation forms we placed in your seats and leave them at the information desk at the front of the reading room as you exit. Now I'd like to invite Dr. Mohamed Salahi, our Arab World Specialist, to the podium to introduce our speaker for today's program. Mohamed?
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you all for joining us. Our speaker today, Randa Kayyali, is a professorial lecturer in anthropology at George Washington University's Elliott School for International Affairs. She received her doctorate from George Mason University in Cultural Studies in 2013 and an MA from American University in Cairo in Sociology Anthropology. Dr. Kayyali has taught Arab World Studies at American University in Washington, D.C., and was a postdoctoral research fellow at Ali Vural AK Center for Global Islamic Studies at George Mason University. She published The Arab Americans, Greenwood Press, 2006, which she received a book award from the Arab American National Museum and was translated into Arabic as Al-Amrikiyun al-Arab. She is the author of a chapter on family in the edited volume, Daily Life of Arab Americans in the 21st Century, and U.S. Census Classifications of Arab Americans, Contestations and Definitions of Identity Markers in the Journal of Ethnic and Migration Studies, published in September of 2013. She currently serves on the board and as treasurer of the Arab American Studies Association and as co-chair of the Triannual Convention. So without further ado, Dr. Randa Kayyali.
I'd like to thank Mohammed and the staff here at the Library of Congress, the Africa and Middle East Division, for their kindness in inviting me and welcoming me to this lecture series. I'd also like to thank the Arab American National Museum and Helen Samhan for the images that you will see in this PowerPoint. This piece is a work in progress, so I hope, and I'm looking forward to the question and answer session. The classification of Middle Easterners and North Africans in the US as white by race stretches back over a century ago. In light of the possibility that there might be a new Middle Eastern and North African box, a MENA box, and I'll use that acronym throughout my presentation, on the 2020 census form, this historical research has contemporary significance. In today's presentation, we will learn that debates over the MENA racial classifications are not novel, and that a deeper examination of history and critique of the historical narratives offers the contemporary reader three noteworthy insights. Firstly, the naturalization rulings in US courts that determine the eligibility of early MENAs to US citizenship show that labels of the geographic region and the perceptions of people within them determined race. While they were ultimately classified as white and therefore grouped with Europeans, those with Middle Eastern origins were noted as from Asia in terms of continental assignments, but not ultimately Asiatic or Mongolian by race. Secondly, I will show that the judges in these cases drew a Christian-Muslim binary and placed a premium on their origins in the Mohammedan world, as it was called back then, occasionally noting the Eastern rites of their Christianity, and generally grouping Syrian Christians with Islam by culture, even if they were recognized as Christian. Finally, the history of the US Census classifications indicates that MENAs have been identified by factors other than race and religion on official forms issued by the US government for over a century, specifically through questions relating to ancestry and language spoken at home. In other words, then as now, there are additional ways to access ethnic identity within a broad white racial classification. So it's a bit of background. Since 1977, the US government, and particularly the Office of Management and Budget, has classified white as a person, in quotes, a person having origins in any of the original peoples of Europe, the Middle East, or North Africa, end quote. Although geographic boundaries of the MENA region are undefined, I consider the main ethnic groups in MENA to be Iranians, Persians, Turks, and Arabs, but the region also includes significant numbers of minority ethnic groups, namely the Amazigh, the Kurds, and Armenians, as well as ethno-religious groups, including Chaldeans, Assyrians, Syriacs, Maronites.
Can you please play a sponsorship
and
movie?
often language is tied to each one of these collectivities. This presentation will focus on how people from all of these groups from the MENA region came to be classified by the US government in
Hello viewers around the globe, this is Dr. Afshan Hashmi live for her radio show at K4HD and Talk 4 TV show, and I just wanted to request you that please give me sponsorship if you want this show to continue. Having said that, friends, I will see you in another episode of K4HD Radio plus Talk 4 TV show, and if you give me sponsorship, I will give you very reasonable price, and also you will get lot of promotion as this show is syndicated worldwide to more than 300 million listeners. Cheers and bye bye.
So, folks, they are talking about the origin of Christians and Arabs and how they migrated to United States. So, let's talk about. Let's go back to the movie.
in official records before World War II. Racially, they were classified as white in two batches of legal cases. The first set by Syrian Christians between 1909 and 1915, and the second set by Muslim Arabians, these are terms that were used in these cases, in 1942 and 44. Through an examination of immigration categories, census questions, and racial prerequisite cases, legal cases, I will strive to highlight how geography, race, and religion were in fact intertwined and provide insights into how mainstream American society viewed MENA Americans as between white and non-white. So I wanted to ask you as the audience, if there was ever a time you've been mistaken for a member of an ethnic, religious, or national group that you did not belong to, and how did that make you feel? If you felt that it was a compliment and positive mistaken identity, put up your hands. Okay, nice, 3. And if you felt that it was something that hurt you or was negative, put up your hands. Oh, okay, so about even. We're going to talk a little bit about that today. Sorry. Okay. So in the first sort of phase of immigration, you had the Philadelphia, there were men from North Africa who traveled or were brought to the US as slaves. The Philadelphia World's Fair of 1876 brought people and delegations from the Ottoman Empire, Egypt, and Tunisia to showcase their countries. The Ottoman exhibit heavily featured Palestinian Christians from Bethlehem and Jerusalem who were marketed as being from the Bible land or the Holy Land, with shepherds herding the flocks and images that recalled the Arabian Nights fables. They sold religious items such as olive wood crucifixes from Bethlehem, rosary beads, and mother of pearl decorative items. This was part of the Ottoman Empire's strategy to show the world that they treated their religious minorities with respect. And yet there are media reports, US media reports, of surprise that there were Christians who were Ottoman Turkish subjects, because Arabs and Turks were perceived in the US to be followers of Muhammad. Some of these merchants stayed on, such as Joseph Abi Mader, who was recorded in the 1880 census as living in Philadelphia. So usually I'm just going to cite 5 reasons that are cited for the onset of the first phase of immigration, which began in 1880, or about there. It's not an exact cutoff date, of course, but and that these immigrants came from Bilad Sham, or Syria, an Ottoman province that encompassed present-day Lebanon, Syria, Palestine, Israel, and parts of Jordan, and they came to the US. The fair had prompted stories of wealth and success to be had from selling goods to Americans and offered the lure of adventure. Combined with the economic downturn of the economy due to the collapse of silk factories or sericulture on Mount Lebanon, the financial incentives of living and earning money in the US for a few years were strong. An argument I find compelling is the influence of the Christian missionaries from the US establishing and teaching schools in the region. Also cited, but in my opinion less likely due to the dates, is the sectarian violence, particularly the Druze-Maronite clashes on Mount Lebanon and the riots in Damascus. However, the deterioration of the Ottoman Empire and the conscription of young Christian and Jewish men into the army required in 1909 by the Ottoman Empire were significant factors in the choice of young men to move continents. So I'm going to come back to the issue of millets. Okay, this is a picture of the Zaina family from Damascus, and this is when they were still in Damascus. I believe that they're possibly Orthodox Rum or Rum Catholic Melkites. From their dress, they were definitely urban and probably elite. A little background, though, I want to give you on the Ottoman Empire. In 1516, the Ottoman Empires invaded Bilad Sham and continued to rule almost continuously until World War I. The Ottoman Empire gave Sunni Muslims a primary place as socially and culturally superior to the other communities in the empire. In the 19th century, the state solidified legal and socio-political structures for non-Muslims. In these millets, which I mentioned on the last slide, Christian and Jewish subjects were permitted to regulate their own communities and given some autonomy in terms of family laws, taxation, and collective representation. The largest Christian millet in the 18th and 19th century in the Syrian province was the Orthodox Christian or Rum millet. You write it in English as R-U-M. According to their own ecclesiastical structures, these Orthodox Christians fell under two patriarchates: the larger Greek-dominated patriarchate, or C, of Constantinople, and the smaller Arabic-speaking patriarchate of Antioch that was headquartered in Damascus and had the areas now known as Lebanon and Syria under its jurisdiction. In 1848, the empire gave Greek Catholics, called Rum Catholic in Arabic, who were in union with the Roman Catholic Church, a millet of their own. These Greek Catholics, which despite the name were explicitly Arabic-speaking in services, as well as colloquially, were also known as Melkites, or kingsmen, so named for their loyalty to the Byzantine emperors. Roman Catholics, who were not part of the Melkite Church, and Protestants were granted extraordinary status as protected foreigners, and Maronites and other Latin rights were dealt with at the level of the local provincial administrations. This patchwork of treatment gave religious minorities in the Ottoman Empire a degree of religious freedom, but they were also required to submit to Ottoman demands and the Islamic character of the state or empire. This is the backdrop against which many of the immigrants arrived in the US and perceived identity. The Ottoman millet and decentralized system ingrained identity as defined by religion, broadly Christian, Jewish, Muslim, and noted the differences between religious sects for Christians, Rum Catholic, Roman Catholic, Protestant, and Maronite, for example. And that underlined which areas and sects were answerable to which patriarchs, to which religious figures, to which rabbis. Whether or not the existence of millets created the violence and discrimination against Christians in Mount Lebanon or the riots in the city of Damascus in the late 19th century became less important for the immigrants upon their arrival in their new countries in South and North America than the fact that they had come from the Ottoman Empire. So going back to my question, the migrants from Bilad Sham were recorded as Ottoman or from Turkey and Asia, and sometimes from Palestine or Syria in official immigration records in the US until the end of the Ottoman Empire officially dissolved in 1923. Religion was not recorded, and so estimates of religious breakdowns of the Syrian migrants are problematic. But we can assume that many of the non-Turkish Ottoman subjects might object to classification as Ottoman, because Ottoman was seen as synonymous with Turkish, which was ethnically and linguistically differentiated from Arabic speakers. Back home, these immigrants had informally used the term Turk to refer to Muslims, and in the US, Turk and even Syrian connoted an Islamic identification. This popular assumption in the US in the early 19th century was well founded, was well illustrated by a pulp fiction story that appeared in the American magazine in 1912 that I found nestled in the NAF archives at the Smithsonian. In the story, Emily, a curious young farm girl, asks the self-described peddler from Syria, aren't they Mohammedans, your people? And when he explains that his mother belonged to the Greek church, but that he was Presbyterian, Emily was incredulous. Emily was impressed with how exotic this peddler was, different from her family in every way because of his background in a far-off land. Even if he was Christian, he seemed Mohammedan. Today, of course, we would not use the term Mohammedan because Muslims don't worship Muhammad, but back then it was sort of standard practice. The blurring of the East with Islam follows a traditional Orientalist binary that posits the Orient as defined in opposition to the Occident and Western Christianity. In his critique of Orientalism, Edward Said pointed out that those Orientalist scholars, such as Massignon, saw Eastern Christians as subsumed within Islam and as part of a monolithic East, which had Islam as the superstructure. At a time when the US was increasingly xenophobic, this association with the Islamic other was particularly problematic, especially for immigrants from the East who wanted to gain material and social status in the US. Alexa Naff authored a seminal history book called Becoming American, the Early Arab Experience, and it was published in 1985. And it truly began a deeper interest in the history of the Syrians in particular, but Arabs in general. Though her book and large collection that is housed at the Smithsonian, she initiated a dominant narrative of the early experience, as she called it, meaning before World War II. Within Arab American studies, there is a dominant historical narrative of the poor, illiterate farmer from a village in Mount Lebanon or Syria who came to the US, first arriving in New York at Ellis Island, and then staying or living for a few days or possibly longer in what was called the Mother Colony, which was the Syrian colony that existed at the tip of Manhattan. And then that traveler would possibly travel by train to meet family members or friends and start peddling with the goods that he bought, because most of this discourse is for single men, with the goods in New York. This photo of a pack peddler is somewhat iconic to that narrative. Naff estimated that as much as 95% of the immigrants from Syria were Christian before World War II, while another historian calculated that nearly 90% of all Arabic-speaking immigrants arriving in the US before 1924 were Syrian Christians from Mount Lebanon. According to these historians, the Arabic-speaking immigrants to the US would have been Christian with a minority of Druze and Sunni Muslims. This is a young fellow that is an example that the dominant narrative does contain some truths in my mind. Tawfiq here was all of those things. He was a single male who immigrated in 1914, was a Maronite Christian from a village in Mount Lebanon, Baktuta, east of Beirut. He was a farmer in that village and was unschooled, probably illiterate, and became a laborer and a peddler in the US, where he changed his name by adding Ellis after his father Elias. In 1919, he opened a cigar store with his uncle and later produced arak, an aniseed-flavored spirit, during Prohibition. In 1925, Tawfiq returned to Lebanon to fetch a bride, returning to the US a year later, where he and his wife had his family and lived out the rest of their days. This photo may represent the marginalized narrative of early Arab American history. There's a dearth of information or even ongoing research regarding Egyptian, Iranian, Yemeni, and North African immigrants. This photo shows an allegiance to the Ottoman Empire through the fezes, which are the hats that are shaped like a cone, and the star and crescent on what looks like, to me, a water pipe or possibly a decorative silver or brass vase. It's at the top of the vase. You can see the star. These were possibly Egyptians, possibly Muslim. And the alternative discourse, I believe, needs to be further researched. Who were these immigrants? How did they fit in or differ from the narratives on the Syrians? Why did their race never come up in legal cases until the end, where you do hear Yemeni debates on the Yemeni? However, Syrian identity was recognized in the US Census. In the 1900, 1910, and 1920 censuses, Syrian were a recognized group within the population statistics of foreign-born whites. In the 1910 and 1920 censuses, Syria was listed as a separate birthplace, even though it was still officially part of the Ottoman Empire. During World War I, 1914 to 1918, being associated with the Ottoman Empire became more of a political problem rather than just an identification issue, because the US sided with the Allies against the Axis powers, including the Ottoman Empire. This solidified a move away from associations with the Ottoman Empire for the Syrians, a shift in identity supported and recognized by the US Census Bureau. By 1930, the census, the Ottoman Empire had collapsed and new country of birth appellations became necessary. The Census Bureau asked its census takers or enumerators to record the country of birth according to present geopolitical locations. In 1930, this is specifically mentioning, as you can see, the list up there. This indicates to the researcher that there were other types of Menans present in the US and that the Census Bureau was also recognizing. And another way that Syrians were recognized was through language spoken at home, which was recorded. And then the 1910 census asked, can the person speak English? If not, what language does the person speak? And both Syrian and Turkish were listed as principal foreign languages spoken in the US, but not Arabic. I don't know the reason for that, but that's something that's interesting. And yet in 1920, the options on the respondent's mother tongue expanded to include Arabic. And then again, in 1930, the options were included Egyptian. So in 1930, they had Syrian, Arabic, and Egyptian. However, the Syrian community was not monolithic, even if we just take it as Syrian. An academic, Philip Corey Hitti, published a study in 1924 on Syrians in America that found that most were Christian. Most numerous among the Syrians were the Maronites, followed by the Orthodox and Greek Catholics, Melkites, and then Protestants. While these churches indicated a healthy community, the divisions between sects and nations were becoming increasingly prevalent. New countries were being established under colonial powers by the 1920s, divided between British and French colonial authorities. Coming back to the US, in 1910, the census enumerators were instructed to note down their nativity. And if the respondent said that their parents' nativity was in Turkey, they were asked to note the Asia part. Although the Syrian province is located in Asia, they did not want to be considered Asian due to the prevalent Asian exclusion and restrictions, which were well known. Until 1909, Menans had assumed the privileges of whiteness. They were granted citizenship without much deliberation. They held political offices, and they owned property, even in states where property ownership by aliens was prohibited. The naturalization era began with this, I'm moving, but I'll come back to this topic. The naturalization era began with the 1790 Naturalization Act, which stipulated that only free white persons could become US citizens. The racial designation as white became a prerequisite for naturalization and for full rights as a US citizen. The question then became who qualified to be a free white person, and this decision was determined by the courts, and in particular by judges. Armenians, Mexicans, Indians, and Sikhs all faced racial racial prerequisite cases between 1909 and 1923. But 1 in 3 racial prerequisite cases heard in the US federal courts were of Syrians. Obviously, this number far exceeds the percentage of Syrians or even Menans in the US population.
Okay, folks, so this was a little bit about migration and about Muslims in Arab countries, about that, and the rest of the movie. I will give the link so you can see that, and do let me know how you like the movie. And this was from Library of Congress. So now, folks, I want to remind you that these are my 2 books. The first one is The Modern Mughal Mentality, New Strategies to Succeed in India and the Global Marketplace. And this was an Amazon bestseller in India and in USA. And I want a documentary to be made. So all those documentary producers, please contact me at afshan@drafshanhashmi.com. The second one is The Outbreak of a Monstrous Infection. And this movie came this was an Amazon bestseller, and in a very creative way, I have told about bioterrorism. And bioterrorism is very common these days. So, and it is a suspense thriller. And and it was Amazon bestseller. And I want a movie, and I want a movie or a web series made out of it. Having said that, folks, now let me go and ask Rebel to please play the sponsorship movie.
Hello everyone around the globe. This is Dr. Afshan Hashmi and with K4 HD Radio and Talk 4 TV. And dear friends, I am live from Maryland in a country club, and I just wanted to say that please give me sponsorship if you want these shows to go on, because it takes lot of effort and money to produce these kind of shows. Having said that, friends, please give me sponsorship, and cheers and bye bye.
So actually there was some glitch, so internet was not working or something like that. And folks, now I want to tell you that this show is syndicated worldwide to 300 million listeners. And if Library of Congress, I know they sponsor movies and these kind of radio shows and all, if they give me sponsorship, it will be great. Having said that, folks, now let me read little bit about from this book. People, let's say, a combined example of Jugaad-inspired frugal innovation and creative improvisation. And here is the book, and it says, the latest Bollywood success stories engage rural and urban India as well as the international audience to make a successful movie with a low budget. The Peepli live movie was released August 13, 2010, produced by Amir Khan Productions and co-produced by Ronnie Screwvala, both very well-known producers in India. The movie is a political satire about farmers' suicide in India, written and directed by Anusha Rizvi and co-directed by Mahmood Farooqi, made wonders in the box office. The movie is based on several burning issues in the country. India has a huge rural population, and 3 times as many people live in villages as in the cities. The film has also put the spotlight on the villages across India called Peepli, even though it may not have been the producer's intention. Giving the movie a name synonymous with many villages contributed to its popularity there. People Live was on Netflix and was also shown in movie theaters in the US. The movie won the Best First Feature Film Award at the 31st Durban International Film Festival in South Africa. People Live also competed in the Sundance Film Festival, the first film from India to do so. The movie was backed up by specialty German distribution company Rapid Eye Movies for a special screening at the Berlin International Film Festival. It had its Melbourne premiere at the Melbourne International Film Festival MIF 2010. So People Live has earned a reputation for itself in the global film circuit as well as movie recovered its costs even before releasing. The rural Indias are going to see this movie by great numbers as well as having fans on urban India. The former Prime Minister of India, Dr. Manmohan Singh, watched People Live in a private screening with his family and some other PMO Prime Minister's office officials at his official residence. Amir Khan was also present during the screening of the movie. People Live was India's official entry into the 83rd Annual Academy Awards in the Best Foreign Film category. It was shortlisted from 27 films. This is a great example of Jugaad obtaining your objectives by maximizing resources through thinking outside the box, where a product depicting rural India with a low budget has become so successful. Amir Khan creatively developed a product that engaged and was appreciated by both rural and urban India as well as international audience. So if you haven't seen this movie, go and see this movie. Having said that, folks, these are my two books, and all those Hollywood, Bollywood film producers, please contact me, and documentary producers, please contact me at Afshan at drafshanhashmi.com. Having said that, folks, now please give me sponsorship, as this show is syndicated worldwide to 300 million listeners. So just imagine, if you give me sponsorship, how your show will be syndicated in your show or your book or anything, or your book trailer or anything or your company with 300 million listeners. Having said that, folks, cheers and bye bye.
You've been listening to Meet and Greet with Dr. Afshan Hashmi on K4HD Radio and Talk4 TV. Tune in live right here every Thursday at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. Would you love exposure to your business, product, or service to over 300 million potential listeners? Send an email to info@talk4media.com. And remember, if you miss any part of this show or want to hear it again, find our featured show on iHeartRadio or YouTube, where all past episodes are available on demand 24/7. See you next Thursday at 6 p.m. Eastern Time, right here on K4HD and Talk4 TV.